Still loving the new music, still loving fall camp, still got a lot to discuss on today's episode of Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am Cody Goodwin, joined today by Alex Scarborough. Just a two-man show today. Rodax got some parental duties, so he couldn't join us this morning. We're recording on a Thursday, August 8th. Alabama is in the process, I believe, of starting their 7th fall camp practice at the time that we're recording this, but we have seen 6. We have gotten to talk to coaches and players about those practices, about the progression of the team during fall camp. Scarborough and I are going to discuss a little bit more about what we've seen, what we've heard this week. But before we dive into that, Alex, I'm curious. I wanted to give a shout out, actually, we'll start here, to the folks at EA Sports for hooking us up with the new college football 25 game. They hooked us up with the game. They hooked us up with souped up Xbox consoles, like really awesome. And I'm curious, Alex, have you played it yet?
As the father of a 17-month-old who is constantly has a snotty nose, no, I've not played it yet. I've been meaning to, and I'm thinking probably next week, because we've had a lot of times to go down to Tuscaloosa and see practice. That will start to slack off a little bit as they tighten the reins. So maybe that'll be a time to dig in, and it will definitely be knocking off some rust, because it's been a long time since I've played a video game.
Have you at least plugged the Xbox in? Like, have you, like, you have? Oh man.
That's part of the problem. It's not just the time to play. It's like, okay, here's how long it's been since I've played video games. I've not played a game that's supposed to connect to the internet in a very long time. So I'm worried about the whole setting up profiles, all that stuff. That time commitment is probably going to be a solid 2 hours of just trying to get the darn thing ready. But it looks great. I'm excited to do it.
Yeah, we want to shout out again to the folks at EA Sports for not just us, but there's a handful of people in the 24/7 Sports Network that they reached out to, and just to help spread awareness about the game. And we were fortunate enough to get an email, and it's a really great gift. Like they went above and beyond when it came to a lot of these gifts that they gave to us. Our Xboxes are they're crimson with the script A on them. And it's got the Alabama Crimson Tide, like it's themed. We each got a controller that's themed with it. We got a free copy of the game. I've plugged my box in. Like you, it's been a really long time since I've played video games, like college. In college, me and my roommates had like a Madden fantasy league where we would like draft the players at the start of every school year, and then we would just play effectively dynasty mode, I suppose. We'd have to deal with free agency and trades, and we would all play each other, and it was a really fun time. That was a decade ago. I suck at video games now. I plugged the box in, I downloaded the game, I played it, I hate it. I'm not good at this. I thought after a few times I could get things underneath me, I could get my video game fingers back. No, I'm like horrible. I'm probably annoying my neighbors by how much I'm screaming at the TV, because I just want these guys to play their run blocks and they're not doing it. And I call certain defensive sets and I screw it up because there's a mobile quarterback on the other side. And dude, it is so frustrating.
You're Nick Saban throwing your headset and screaming at everybody for me. I think you need to play in whatever the red shirt mode is, like whatever's below freshman is what you need right now.
There isn't. There's freshman, there's varsity, which is like the normal, like that's what when you log in and play it first, that's the first level. And then there's All American mode, which is really hard. And then there's Heisman mode, which is just, I haven't played it yet. I don't want to play it. I have really bad thoughts thinking about playing on Heisman mode. I played a couple games on All American mode. Again, not very fun. The dynasty or the research and development that I'm doing for a couple of content ideas that we've got coming here in the next couple weeks for, that involve this game. I'm only playing it on like varsity mode. And it's funny you bring up the Nick Saban comparison, because I'm playing as Alabama. I played Vanderbilt last night. I won it by I think it was like 34-14, but it took a minute for me to pull away. And I'm just like vein in my neck and my forehead, shouting at the TV, also reminding myself to calm down because I have neighbors. So like typical Saban fashion, like I'm not playing to the standard that I should be playing against a lesser team. Like Vanderbilt was 0-4 when we matched up in that game, and I'm playing as Alabama. I'm 4-0. Like I need to crush these guys. I don't do it. But then the week before that, I actually pounded Georgia. It was something like 56-24. Like I had 2 pick sixes in that game. Cool as a cucumber. Like just it's very Saban-esque the way I'm approaching this video game.
See, one of the more interesting things to me is not necessarily the gameplay itself, but how they're going to handle updates and like this player has emerged and here's how we see his attributes changing. We're all fascinated. I mean, everybody in football space, we love our lists and our rankings. I think it's going to be potentially one of the more interesting tweaks of like trying to do that, like how they see that shifting over time.
It may or may not be part of the content idea that I have for the regular season as it involves, EA College Football 25. But with regards to the updates, it sounds like one of the first new updates is coming out either today or sometime by the end of the week. They're going to fix some of the bug fixes when it comes to gameplay. They're going to update a few stadiums. In some of the dynasty modes, if you've like talked to like people who are like deep into the gaming community, some of those FCS teams are like actually very good. And so I guess they're like going to tamp down the sliders on those so that they're not nearly as good as some of like the Power 4 schools. They're going to update some rankings now that they've got some fall camp intel, right? And I'm same as you. I'm very curious to see, like, especially when it comes to Alabama, like how accurate are the updates? How accurate is the game over the course of the season? And that's, because these guys poured a lot of time and energy into creating the game. And that's another thing I've noticed just like playing it is, before I started a dynasty mode, I played just like a couple of like exhibitions. I played one at the Rose Bowl, looks legit. I played one at the Peach Bowl, looks legit. I played a road game. I believe that was Alabama versus Tennessee in Knoxville. Like Neyland Stadium looks cool. The very first game I played was the Iron Bowl in Tuscaloosa. Bryant-Denny, like it's legit. Like they don't have the Dixieland Delight because I think there's a lot of like music things and licenses that they couldn't get. But everything else about Bryant-Denny Stadium and the game day atmosphere, they nailed it. Like it's really impressive, a lot of the details that they poured into this thing.
I wonder if they'll be able to turn around the Saban Field update and get that signage on the field and on the stadium. No, it's sweet. I mean, they spent a decade getting this to where it is today, and there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, literal tears, I think, that went into these. People care about it. I do hope that one of the updates comes to the realization that maybe Colorado isn't that great. Maybe we can pump the brakes a little bit on them, but it's okay. It's all good.
It's kind of goofy the way that it's unfolding. This will the last point, and then we'll actually get into fall camp because I don't think people care too much about video games. But it's funny, like the dynasty mode that I'm playing, like it's so random. I think I was telling you before one of the practices, like I'm playing as Alabama, so like I'm undefeated. But when I played Georgia, that was week 5, right? Because it's Alabama played 3 games, had the bye week. Georgia came in 1-2. The computer had them losing to Clemson and then had them losing to Kentucky. So some of these simulations are going to be like really, really goofy. So I wonder, will the goofiness still be reflected in the updates, or will the updates like take care of that for those who want to like play Dynasty with the season, if that makes sense?
The computer doesn't like street racing, maybe.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing about like, because in terms of like, as players get better or worse, like their overall will be updated. But like, what about suspensions? Like, are they in the next update? Is Ra Thomas even going to be on George's roster? That's a good question.
You got to think if it's a definitive, this person is no longer with the program. Yeah, and if it's, I don't know. What about injury? That is a really good question. I don't know, because it's like, are you playing? Is it very intentional? You are playing within the 2024 season, or do they think of it absent that? Yeah, that'd be a good question to ask.
We'll have to keep tabs on that as we go through the season and continue to play this game. Hopefully, one, I'm too busy, so I don't play the game as much when we actually get into the season. But also, hopefully, if I end up playing the game into the season, I get better at it. Because, man, it's so frustrating. You'll learn when you finally plug your box in.
I hope for your neighbor's sake that you do.
Yeah, I'm also hoping that. I don't want them to hate me. Fall camp continues. Alabama in the midst of practice while we're recording this right now. As of today, 23 days away from week 1. Still a lot of fall camp left. I believe they're going to practice on 14 of the next 17 days.
Yeah.
access to practice is going to be tamped down quite a bit. They've got a couple of scrimmages that are in there that we won't get to watch, but we'll get to talk to Kalen DeBoer afterwards. Fan Day, I believe, is on Sunday. I'll get to go sit in the sun and see if we learn anything from that. We do get to watch a couple more practices. There's a lot that we have seen through this first week that maybe, I don't know if it answered some questions, but it offered some interesting things, kind of like we did on Monday to recap, what did we learn from the next couple of days? That's kind of what I wanted to do today. What we learn, what we see, are we able to tie some things together after we were able to talk to a handful of more assistants and players? And I'm curious, Alex, I'll throw it to you first, just wide open. What stood out about the last couple of days of fall camp from your perspective?
It's been really interesting to see the depth develop and to try to make sense of what it means in terms of a potential depth chart for down the road. There's a couple positions in particular that stand out in that respect. I talked about on the last podcast we did that the receiver room is really deep, and I really like the attributes that are there. Whether you're talking about the way Kendrick Law clearly did not miss a workout this offseason, just ripped and moving well. Jeremy Bernard asserting himself. So those two clearly at this point appear to be atop the depth chart. And then, how did the rest of the pieces fall into place, whether it's Kobe Prentice? It looks like Ryan Williams might be leaping ahead of another freshman in terms of Caleb Odom. It's probably too early to say that. But I think Ryan has positioned himself very well to be in the mix early on and play his way into an opportunity. And then the other depth piece to me is the defensive line. And I should just say pass rush. And so edge, Wolf, and that bandit spot, I kind of put those two together. I don't know if there's a dude there. I don't know if there's a guy who's just going to be a game wrecker who you're going to rely on all the time. But I do think there's bodies. I do think there's different types you can throw out there. A Q Robinson, a Quay Russo, I think it was Kane Womack who just said he's just freaky athletic. So can they make the most out of him and have somebody bringing some pressure off the edge? I think there's a good feel of what the depth is there, but can you create a pecking order at the top? And then one last one is obviously that cornerback position. I went into it expecting that Deshaun Jones would probably be the second guy opposite Damani Jackson. And so far, I'm wrong. So far, it's Xavier Brown being that guy. Really not just physically gifted, but the thing you keep hearing about is the approach to the game. Yeah, the being in, asking the right questions. I think it was Kane who said it, that this is a guy that when he makes a mistake, and you pointed out, he does not make that same mistake a second time. And that to a coach is music to their ears. So looking more and more like he's going to be relied upon. I still think Deshaun Jones will play a significant role in the secondary. But again, just trying to sort out what the pecking order is.
Yeah, well, and the interesting part, we'll start there with the cornerbacks because a lot of good stuff there. It seems like Xavier Brown may start week 1. And I think we kind of said that on the last show because DeBoer had that quote about trusting him a lot, like how he trusts him a lot and he doesn't look like a freshman out there and he fits right into the defense. It seems more and more that that's where we're headed, that Brown may get the first crack at the starting job. And if for whatever reason it doesn't work through the first week or two, or he needs to reset or something, you do have Jones sitting right there. I think the other interesting development about the cornerbacks, though, specifically, Jalen Mbakwe seems to be making as many strides as Xavier Brown. Now, I don't know that he's at the, is he going to start level yet? But it seems like he could potentially be the third guy off the bench, or he could be that sixth defensive back in a sub package. Like Womack, I think, said specifically, like he's made as many strides as anybody on the defense between the spring and now. And obviously he's a versatile athlete. He played virtually every single, I don't know that he came off the field for Clay Chalkville last year in their run to a state championship, but he seems to be gaining more confidence, and it seems more and more like he is going to play pretty significant snaps. I don't know if it's going to be in a starting role, but he may be applying some pressure to the guys who end up starting, whether that's Jones, Brown, Jackson. These freshmen, like they're it seems like they're practicing like 5 stars and they're living up to that billing, at least Mbakwe and Brown, based on what we've heard.
Yeah, and another one who kind of blend, is he a safety as a cornerback, the Husky position. Red Morgan continuing to develop in a good way. Can he push Devontae Smith? I think there's a lot of hope around Devontae. The experience in the program definitely matters. Experience playing football really matters. But also the interesting development that King Mack is also, I think, in that mix. I don't know if it's a cross training the guy just in case you need him thing, but he brings a lot of athleticism, a lot of tools to the table. And, I don't think there's any doubt that Malachi Moore and Keon Sabb are the two answers at safety. So trying to get that talent on the field in a King Mac going to be really interesting to see if they try to find different ways of bringing him on the field.
Yeah, when asked about the Husky position specifically, Womack came back with, this word for word, I just pulled the quote up. Devonta Smith has done a really good job. Red Morgan has really impressed me. It's fun to watch freshmen from where they were in the spring to where they're headed and that jump they make. He's made a huge jump. I've been pleased with some of the things I've seen from King Mack, too, coming from another institution, learning all the things he's needed to learn. He's made a step here in the summer to be able to do what he can so he can execute at a high level, at the level we need him to. So seems like Devonta Smith, maybe it's just because he was the first name out of Kane's mouth that maybe he's the de facto leader, but it looks like there's these other two guys that could potentially push for playing time. And what strikes me as really interesting is and this is probably not the most ideal scenario on paper, but there seems to be a really good possibility that at some point this season, Alabama will have three true freshmen in the defensive secondary in Brown, Mbakwe, and perhaps Red Morgan at Husky. How do we feel about that?
I don't know if you want to throw three on the field at the exact same time. Maybe you put a transfer in that mix. It's just asking a lot unless you're talking about you're in the fourth quarter and you're up 3 touchdowns.
Right.
Then, throw them to the Wolves. But that's a lot to put on the back end of the defense. But again, these don't feel like your ordinary freshmen. Whether you're talking about body types, physicality, but also what we're hearing in terms of their approach to the game and the work they've put in, and the fact that they came early in the spring. So I'm not going to rule anything out. It's kind of like when I asked Gillespie about the running backs the other day, and I said, is there any chance we see both Jam and Justice on the field at the same time? Because they're very clearly inseparable atop the depth chart. And he's like, it's incumbent on them to make us try to put together a personnel package like that. If you show us that you guys can do it and there's something there, we're going to do it. So maybe those freshmen can push and say, look, we've proven we're all capable of being out there and being counted on.
With regards to the running backs, two quick thoughts. One, they both started on A-Day. I think that was by design by DeBoer to not give away whatever hints, or maybe they both just earned it. Secondly, there's a lot of pony personnel plays in the EA college football game in Alabama's playbook. I'm not saying, but I'm just saying it probably exists. I wanted to revisit the outside linebacker conversation. You mentioned Quay Russaw, and we've talked about how Russaw has kind of elevated himself with Q Robinson and Keanu Codd as those are kind of the leaders of the quote unquote Wolf Pack, right? What interests me about the Wolf position is that you ask Kane about it, and it's like a lot of good vibes around Quay Russaw, a lot of good vibes about Yanze Pierre kind of changing his body a little bit and readjusting to that. The young guys are doing really well. Q Robinson has become kind of the leader of the group. Keanu Cott's another freaky athlete. When DeBoer was asked about it, I thought this was very interesting. He basically, one, he said he liked the energy of the group. And also, he really likes the results that he's seen in some of those 11-on-11 drills during practice. Those are the things that we don't get to see, so we kind of have to take DeBoer at his word here, right? This was his exact quote. The results are very similar. They've shown the ability to consistently rush off the edge. We have strength in numbers. You have to have your highlighted guys, and as time goes on, we'll have those that really become the stars. Right now, they're all in a really good spot, competing, attacking. I don't really feel like there are any missed assignments ever because they know when they get that rep, they have to execute and do their job. It's kind of interesting that no matter who you put out there, it seems that the results are the same, at least to the head coach. That could either be a very good thing because you got a lot of dudes that can rush the passer. It could also be a really bad thing because they may not miss their assignments, but are they impacting the game? That's what maybe we don't know yet.
Yeah, and this is kind of the other, the other side of having a really good tandem in Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. When they leave at the same time, you don't know who the next guy is because they just haven't had those reps. So on the one hand, you've got a lot of guys who are really hungry, a lot of guys who are trying to make the most of an opportunity. On the other hand, you don't know what that production is, who you can rely upon. And that's why when we get into scrimmages and that kind of thing, hopefully you start to see some separation there because look, at the end of the day, it's great to have depth. You want to know who your guy is going to be. There's a reason you spotlight an edge rusher. Almost every team wants to have a Will Anderson, a Dallas Turner, whoever it might be. So hopefully you can develop who that guy is. But it is good to have depth. It is good to feel like there are options there at least.
There are some cases, not all cases, but I would argue most cases, when coaches come out and say, hey, like we got two quarterbacks, sometimes that means they have none, right? And I don't know that it's an exact one-for-one comparison, but sometimes that can apply to other positions as well. Like you may have three dudes at edge rusher. I think you would like to find out who that number one is first, and then you can worry about the depth and how the rest of the pecking order is. And that's with the first scrimmage coming up this Saturday. They're going to have another one before the end of fall camp. Maybe we'll learn a little bit of something there. Maybe we won't. I don't know.
I'm not ready to say what it looks like, but I think they're going to have to get very creative in terms of how they create pressure and bringing it from different spots and from potentially different personnel. I think it's going to be incumbent on Kane Womack to get creative and try to subsidize what you might be lacking a little bit. The development will happen. These are good coaches. They're recruiting at a high level, and there are good young players in the program. Noah Carter's one of them. But it might take some time. So in the meantime, you're gonna have to coach them up and really work the chalkboard a little bit to try to create some pressure out of thin air a little bit.
Wanted to revisit also the receivers as well, just in terms of we don't really know what the depth chart exactly looks like. I think we're all kind of penciling in, for now at least, Jeremy Bernard, Kendrick Law in some capacity are probably going to be the starters. I think we all like Kobe Prentice potentially as another one, perhaps out of the slot. What I found interesting this week, we were able to talk to Jamarcus Shepard, receivers coach, and when he was asked basically like, what's the growth been like? Or what's the progression been like? Or how do you feel like they've developed? Or what has the development been like? He came back and said, really? None. Here's the full quote. At this point, we haven't played a game. When we play a game, that's when we'll know if the progress has become what we want it to be. Right now, it's just guys out there running plays or not game planning anything. We're just giving them concepts to be able to execute and seeing who can execute those concepts. Just show that you can operate within the offense at a high level. This is the good news. He's looking for missed assignments. It does not seem like there's been many. So that's thumbs up. A large credit, I think, probably belongs to Jeremy Bernard there for coming in before spring ball and really helping a lot of these guys understand the details and the concepts and what's going to be asked and required of the receivers in an offense like this, because they do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of shifts and motions. They're going to be asked to block. I think one of, when Shepard first came down to Tuscaloosa, one of the first things out of his mouth was, if you don't block, you don't play. I mean, it's encouraging that all these guys seem to be doing well, but it's also like, what's the hierarchy look like? What's the depth chart look like? Who are going to be the primary X, Y, and H receivers, right? Like, that's what we want to know. That's what we don't know yet.
The cynic in me wonders if this is Jamarcus saying, I've been really positive pretty much since I set foot here. He's had a lot of really good things to say about a lot of receivers. Get your popcorn ready about Ryan Williams. This is the time to kind of swing the other direction and kind of pull the reins back a little bit. So probably the truth lies somewhere in the middle, that there are good players on this roster. It's just a matter of let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's give these guys a little bit of time to sort out among themselves who can make plays. Because it reminds me of like a Nick Saban line when it comes to the quarterback. You gotta go out there and win it. I'm not choosing the quarterback. You guys are choosing the quarterback.
Make us play you. I think that was the line last year.
Exactly. So, who's going to go out there and make plays? And you can do that in practice all you want. You can run a great route on air. I think it's when it gets to scrimmage and it's jump ball who's going to go out there and get it. I think that's what Jamarcus is getting at, and that carries on into the season as well. So I think we'll get a lot more clarity as we get a couple of weeks into the season too, and see who is making those plays when the pressure's really on. Because all these guys are athletic. All these guys can catch the football on air. It's doing it when somebody's going to knock your daylights out if you don't do it the right way.
Well, and then one final note on the receivers too. This is again from Shepard. He was asked what's kind of the determining factors when you're deciding whether to put somebody outside or put them in the slot or have them be receiver one versus receiver two, that sort of thing. I thought this quote was actually fairly enlightening. He said, when you're looking at slots versus outside, one of the main components is whether or not they can catch the football without seeing the ball come out of the quarterback's hand. That's where I spend a lot of time making that determination, whether or not somebody can track the ball without seeing the quarterback throw it. Sometimes it's more difficult for guys to track that. They need to see the quarterback wind up and throw. Beyond that, in this offense, anybody can play anywhere. So it almost sounds like, just reading that back just now, a little bit of a challenge to like the room. Like, hey, like, who do you want to be the X receiver? This is what I need to see from you. Do you want to be heavily used in this offense? This is what I need to see from you. So be kind of interesting to see, we won't get to see the scrimmages, but the first couple of weeks, who is able to do that? I think we all believe that Jeremy Bernard can do that, but can Kendrick Law do that? Can Kobe Prentice do that? Can Ryan Williams do that? It sounds more and more like they're going to maybe slow play him into the offense a little bit. I think it was DeBoer that said, we don't need him day one. So maybe they are taking some variation of like the Luther Burden track that we have talked about previously on this show. Can he do that? If he can, maybe that speeds up the process a little bit. I don't know. What do you think?
He can track the football. I have no doubt about that. To me, it's more the physicality part
Yeah.
and route concepts and those kind of things, like the things that take time to develop. I've never really heard it put that way from Jamarcus, as far as see the ball without seeing it coming out of the quarterback's hand. It makes a lot of sense. I did think it was interesting. And again, I don't want to extrapolate one practice, but seeing, I want to say it was Kobe being number one in that slot. I think you're really high on his ability. Cole Adams being right there behind him as a guy who Jamarcus obviously called Mr. Reliable earlier, who does develop, because that is a unique position in terms of they're asking you to do something different than what's on the outside. But ultimately, I'll bring it around to a point you made before. Can he trust you to handle the motions and the shifts and not commit those false start penalties that just kill offenses? They do put a lot on their receivers, not just blocking, but like conceptually and pre-snap. Who can handle those things? I think that's going to be a big determining factor, especially early in the season as far as who
Yeah.
plays.
Yeah. And if that means playing a Cole Adams over a Kobe Prentice because Adams can execute those little things, goes back to that trust factor that I think we've talked about, not just here about the cornerbacks, but just previously about what are the coaches looking for? They're looking for guys that they can trust to execute what they want out there. And the receivers, I think, are going to be a really interesting little subplot to that idea, especially through the first few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of things that have interested me through at least these last couple of days. We haven't really spent a lot of time talking about the quarterbacks because we haven't really needed to, right? Like last year, that was the fall camp storyline. Who's going to be the starter this year? It's very definitively Jalen Milroe. He did an interview this week with the men's mental health podcast from Disrupt Media, the same guys that do the next round. And he had a very interesting quote that I think says a lot about, one, where he's at coming into the season, but two, it maybe kind of gives credence as to why we believe Milroe could have a very, very big year. I know, especially like you and me. He was asked just about where's your head at coming into the season. Milroe said he feels really, really good. And then specifically, he said, I trust in our coaching staff. They're very confident in me. They don't lack any trust in me. They're all in on me. You play a little differently and you feel a little more confident as a player when you have a whole army behind you that'll back you up no matter what you go through, end quote. He kind of tiptoes up to the line a little bit. There's some of us, I know, especially you and me, that are like, is that a dig at last year's offensive staff? But it does kind of play into the idea that you and I have discussed about how we feel this offensive brain trust with DeBoer and Sheridan and Shepard and all those guys are going to help set Milroe up, I think, to succeed a lot more this year, maybe than what Tommy Rees did last year. And it's not a shot at Tommy Rees. They had their ideas going into last season. Last season is not this season. Different staff, different minds, different ideas. But it kind of tells you a little bit about maybe why. I mean, maybe it offers some hints, I suppose, is a better way to phrase it, about why DeBoer's offense has always worked everywhere he's been. There's been this all-in mentality on, whoever the quarterback is. They throw everything they have behind that guy and do their best to put him in situations where he'll succeed. And it seems like Milroe is feeling that through fall camp so far.
Yeah, he won't take a shot at Tommy Rees, but I'm happy to. I don't think the offense was at all built around Jalen Milroe's strengths until it became undeniable that you had to do it. I mean, it still boggles my mind the change that came from that bye week. and why it took that long to get there. Is some of that on Nick Saban? Yeah, probably, but he's a defensive guy. He comes at it from a different perspective. And I think ultimately that's where Milroe's going with it. Is there's just a different way of looking at the quarterback position when you've spent your career either playing it in the instance of a Sheridan or coaching it in the instance of a Kalen DeBoer. You understand that there's a little bit of a mentality thing that goes on, that when you've decided a guy's the starter, you put everything behind him. Nick Saban was not bashful about criticizing a quarterback. Was willing to change at that position.
Yeah.
Offensive guys who've done that know that that messes with people's heads, so they're a little bit less likely to do it. So you're seeing that, I think, psychological difference that is behind it, but also just the simple fact that Jalen Milroe is not competing for a job. A year ago, he was, and it's a whole different kind of mindset. You've gone through an entire offseason not sitting there going, looking over your shoulder. So part of that is just inherent in knowing who you are. You've got to think this is all a positive development, right? You've got to think that this allows him to play a little bit more freely, because I think you and I both agree it looked like there was times where he looked like he was second guessing himself in real action, in live time. Not really pumping, pump fakes that, not really knowing comfortable where he wants to go with the football. I think if they are instilling this confidence in him, if he knows he's got this machinery behind him that is all in, hopefully it's trusting what your eyes see and just playing football. And if he does that, I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah, everybody sees the wrestling thing behind me. I think back to like when I was covering wrestling, and every now and like you wouldn't, this is not a topic of conversation that I would always ask, but like I do remember a couple of different times asking wrestlers specifically, right? Because there's 10 wrestlers in a collegiate wrestling lineup, and every program has various lineup battles similar to the positional battles. But when you ask a wrestler, like, what is the feeling like going to practice every day or going to various competitions when you know you're the guy, when you know you don't have to deal with a positional battle? And there's a few guys, like when you ask them that question, like their shoulders drop, you can literally see the relief that washes over them. They're just like, it's like when you know you're the guy, like, you're the guy. And that sounds like a very simple, like, duh, but also like, it's a totally different mentality. Like you approach everything differently. You approach practice differently. You approach workouts differently. You approach day to day differently. And I'm sure that's what Milroe is feeling now. He knows he's the guy. The coaches have told him so. The coaches have showed him as much during practices, during these workouts. I imagine that is such a feeling of relief. And also it's just going to bolster his confidence, because you could tell just talking to him. We've only got to talk to him once during fall camp, but he's walking a little differently, right? He's talking a little differently. You can just sense and feel the confidence in him. That's, again, I feel good if you feel good. He seems like he feels really good.
Yeah, and look, competition's a good thing. It's always going to be there, but quarterback is different, and we just have to acknowledge that there are 9 guys out of every 10. They need to feel confident that they're not going to be pulled the first time something bad happens. And I think Jalen went through a lot of last season thinking that that was the case. So to know that this staff is not likely to do that, I think is only going to bolster where he's at. And you're right. It's not just words, it's also actions and the way they've presented, what the offense looks like. Jalen going up to New York and doing all that. I think if there was a question about his readiness, I think they might have said, well, maybe don't do that. But no, all signs are pointing toward a really solid relationship. Now we just got to see what it looks like on the football field and whether all of those positive vibes equal positive production.
That's a separate conversation that may take time to develop. It may not look pretty at first, but I feel like that's to be expected a little bit with so much changeover, right? One last thing I want to touch on before we look forward. I know tight ends is not exactly the most exciting position group to talk about. I think even Mike said that it was just a boring position group, and it might be. I'm not here to dispute that. However, at practice on Wednesday, we saw quite a bit of multiple tight end sets. They were going through various drills, pass catching drills. We saw 12 personnel on like mid to deep range routes that they were running, and the quarterbacks were throwing them deep balls. We saw some 13 personnel in what looked like a red zone drill. when talking to CJ Dupree afterwards, we got to finally speak with him for the first time, I think, since he transferred here. Now that I'm thinking about it, somebody may have grabbed him after, the Rose Bowl, I think, when it was open media. But he said he was super excited about DeBoer's offense and how historically tight ends play a pretty significant role. Even DeBoer himself, when I asked him on Sunday, very passionate explanation about what the tight ends can bring to the offense as a whole. I'm not saying that we're going to see a ton of 12 and 13 personnel, 2 and 3 tight end sets, but we might see it on occasion, and all those guys might be in there as pass catchers. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I think CJ Dupree can play football. I think he's a guy who brings multiple things to the table and can help out in the passing game. I don't know what's behind him. I don't know that I think Robbie is more of an H-back type, do the dirty work, help out in the running game. There's obviously value in that. The wild card to me is Josh Cuevas, a guy who I think they have a lot of belief in and can stretch the field a little bit. It just seems like tight ends in terms of passing game, it's all or nothing. It's like you either have a Brock Bowers or you have something forgettable, right? And I think right now their strength is their depth at receiver and what they're going to be able to throw at you. And if they see Jalen Milroe as a running quarterback candidate, scramble and make some yards, it makes a little bit more sense to spread the field with multiple receivers. So I lean toward pumping the brakes on tight end production. But at the same time, you can't ignore the historical context of what you bring up, and you can't ignore what they're saying. If they are able to do that, man, it is really positive in terms of what they can bring to the balance in terms of the running game. But right now, I'm a little bit skeptical that we're going to see multiple tight ends catching double-digit passes. I just don't know that that's there.
Yeah, well, and if you dig through DeBoer's history, and I forget if I only wrote about this or if I brought it up on a previous pod, he's got experience using tight ends in different ways, right? Like I think at Washington, he had Jack Westover, who was, I think the way I phrased it was like he was part of the supporting cast, right? Because last year's Washington offense, it was those 3 receivers. It was Michael Penix Jr. and Westover. He got a lot of one-on-ones, so we got a lot of opportunity, but he wasn't the primary guy. If you go back to Fresno, those 2 years, they had 2 running backs in Ronnie Rivers and Jordan Mims. They had a handful of tight ends, but they were buried on the offensive production sheet, I suppose. Like there was a lot of receivers and they had the 2 running backs, and the tight ends weren't really there as offensive weapons. They were, significantly lesser role, I think was the way I described it when I wrote the story. And then you go back to Indiana when he was the offensive coordinator, DeBoer. Peyton Hendershot was one of the primary pass catching targets. Like it was him and Watt Filer, if I remember correctly. So like he caught like 50 passes, 4 touchdowns, 800 yards. So he's got experience using tight ends as either a primary, as a supporting actor, or, as somebody who might be lesser than. And I think what's really curious about the tight ends is I don't know what role they're going to take on, right? We talked about the depth in the receiver room. We really like what Alabama has at running back. What does that mean for the tight ends? Because there's only so many targets and passes that everybody can get, right? You can only feed so many people. So what's their role? I don't know. That's a very interesting subplot that I just haven't figured out yet.
Here's a question, and I go back to spring practice and hearing from Justice and Jam Miller about what's going to be asked of them in terms of the passing game. Do you think at the end of the season the running backs will have more catches or the tight ends will have more catches?
Oh, that's a really good question. Like collectively as a room?
Collectively, I think it's going to be the running backs are going to be featured more in the passing game than the tight ends are. My gut says that.
I think so too, just because in terms of overall talent, the running backs just have a significantly higher ceiling than the tight ends, just as we see them right now. I think Dupree can be one of those. He could be a Jack Westover. I think that's what CJ Dupree could be. I think, Josh Cuevas can ultimately evolve into that role. He may need just another year of development to get ready for the SEC. I think Dupree could be that Westover guy. I also think that they're probably going to heavily involve the running backs in some capacity, especially early on as they're trying to figure out what the roles in the receiver room are. Like they very well know, and you wrote this story, Justice Haynes, Jam Miller, 1A, 1B, they're interchangeable. Richard Young, don't forget about that guy. He's going to play quite a bit this year as well, especially early on when they know you've got those dudes while maybe the rest of the offense figures itself out. Yeah, I think I would probably go running backs.
Yeah. As in particular, I think Jam is probably the one that excites you the most in terms of being able to move him around on the football field.
Yeah. Well, hey, those of us who remember that wheel route touchdown against Georgia, like if you go back, I'm not saying you should do this now because it's August and we're into fall camp, but if you go back and rewatch a lot of their games from last year, many, many reasons to criticize Tommy Rees. He was trying to implement that running back catching the pass out of the backfield all season long. And it really wasn't until the Georgia game that they finally nailed it.
Yeah, there were some accuracy issues that came about in terms of getting the running back because you got to be precise getting
Yeah.
running backs the ball. It just they're not their catch radius is not the same. But no, absolutely, and it's a weapon. It
Yes.
really is when you can get the passing game going to those backs. And I just have this suspicion that that's going to be a thing that bubbles up a little bit.
I agree 100%. That's a good question. Be kind of not see now I'm going to track it. I'm just like week to week, like who had more catches. I money's on the running backs. That's a good point. Looking ahead, Alabama, again, we're not going to get nearly as much practice access as we got over these first 6 practices of fall camp. I think we only go to 2 more practices. We'll be at fan day, and we won't get to watch the couple of scrimmages that they have planned, but we'll get to talk to DeBoer afterwards. The first one is on Saturday. Last year, looking at the close scrimmage that they had, that was kind of the first time we started really hearing rumblings about Amari Niblack emerging as a potential dude. That was one of the first times that we heard rumblings of Tim Keenan really stepping up into that starter role on the defensive line. When you look at this first scrimmage coming up, what are some expectations that you have? What are things you're maybe hoping to hear afterwards? What do you want DeBoer to say for you to maybe feel good moving forward? I'm going to leave it open-ended.
I look at it like separation Saturday. Like we've had a lot of rotations and a lot of positions, like I said early on. This is that time where you got to start figuring out who you're relying on, who's winning those battles. I talked to Coach Cap about the offensive line and rotating those tackles and cross training. Like it's all fun and good to do the first 10 days, whatever we're talking about, for 7, 8 practices. But once you start coming out of that scrimmage, you need to start narrowing it down because we are only 2 weeks until a game week, 3 weeks,
23 days away from week 1.
23 days until the first game of the season, and you need to start to build chemistry. You need to start seeing the product on the field. So you want to see what receivers are able to go out there and make plays. You want to see how the tackle situation sorts itself out. You want to hear names bubbling up, and frankly, you want to hear the names you expect, right? Like if Caden Proctor struggles, and suddenly you're like, "Oh no, we really are going to rotate 3 tackles." That's great to say. I don't know if that's great in practice because the tackle affects the guard, affects the center, affects the quarterback. There's a ripple effect there. So you want the people you think you can rely on to show that they can. And I think it's probably a boring and obvious thing to say, but you want to hear that those guys are asserting themselves, and it's no longer a hey, we're going to rotate the rest of fall camp. We're in crunch. We're getting toward crunch time now, and the separation needs to happen.
That's fair. And even as I say that, should the tackle battle, for example, linger into the season? Because that is something that Coach Cap said that he would be comfortable with as long as the guys earned it.
Mm-hmm.
They do have the little bit of the runway in that they play Western Kentucky and then South Florida. And by Wisconsin, you really want to have this stuff figured out. Yeah. So they do have that little bit of the runway. But I generally agree. Like a lot of these positional battles, you'd like to see people take, I don't know if substantial lead is even the right way to phrase it, but you want to see guys start to separate themselves in the way that you phrased it. I like that. Is there any one particular position battle? I know we've harped on offensive tackle, I feel like quite a bit, but that you're hoping to hear more from, or that you want like, what's the biggest positional battle that you're going to be curious about after Saturday's scrimmage?
I do think it's the tackles because again, like I said, it's great to say we're moving Pritchett from left to right. Well, Pritchett needs to get comfortable either playing next to Tyler Booker or playing next to Jaden Roberts because they do work in tandem so much, and it's a communication thing and it's a feel thing. And you want to see that there's a pecking order there. You want Caden Proctor to feel good about where he's at left tackle and kind of solidify everything else. Yeah, that's the one that I don't know that we're going to get a clear picture. And I understand Cap saying, I'll feel comfortable rotating 3 guys. But I bet if you gave him truth serum and said what you really wanted would be like, I want player X to go out there and dominate and it to be no doubt. Like that's what you really want. So can that happen? Is it too soon? Maybe. But you want to start to see that separation so you don't have to have it linger into the season unless it just requires it.
If you were to make a prediction, who do you think will be the star of this first scrimmage?
Oh, that's a good question.
Maybe not the star, but a star.
I think what's going to happen, maybe not a star, but I think the defense is going to have a good scrimmage, in particular, pressuring the quarterbacks. I think that follows what we saw in the spring. I think it is an effect of moving guys around on the offensive line. I just have a feeling that the quarterbacks might have a little bit of a hard day getting the football off. Yeah, I think Quay Russo might be a name that bubbles up. We'll see. But that's kind of where my gut says it probably ends up where we come out of it. Defense wins probably early on, and then the offense will catch up.
I like if I were to pick a defensive player to maybe keep an eye on, I like the King Mack pick. No disrespect to Devonta Smith. I think Red Morgan's probably the future of that Husky position and will find a home in the secondary in some capacity. I think King Mack can show some stuff. I don't know if it's ultimately going to translate to 1 million snaps this season, but I'd like to think that maybe he can take a step forward in this scrimmage because he's a dude that can really do some stuff. He's athletic. He's versatile. He can play the run. He can cover. He's kind of like maybe a smaller Justin Jefferson. I know we kind of talked to him a little bit. You brought up the really good point that maybe he's the linebacker you put out there to cover the running back in space effectively. King Mack could potentially bring something similar. If you go back and watch he didn't play a ton for Penn State last year, but you go watch some of the small glimpses that he had. He flashed potential to be a guy that's got really good closing speed and really good physicality. It'd be kind of fun to see him blossom up in that Husky position and maybe steal some snaps from Devonta Smith. I don't know. That could be a name to watch.
He's a good pick. The other name I'd like to just know what it looks like is Cam Howard. I think he's gotten a little bit lost in the mix there. I'm not saying he's expected to do too terribly much this year. He provides important depth. But I think he's the transfer that's kind of flown under the radar, but I know they like his future, just what he looks like in an SEC setting. He's making the biggest leap, right, going from a Charlotte to an Alabama, whereas Deshaun Jones, Wake Forest, King Mack, Penn State, Power Forward programs now, how that transition looks like for him.
I think on the offensive side of the ball, I'd prefer it if the tackles solidified themselves this first scrimmage. I don't think that's a realistic ask. What I do think, I'm expecting a little bit out of Kendrick Law. If he is as physically imposing and as physically impressive as he looks, because we've seen him at practice the last few days, and everybody within the offensive side of the building seems to be very, very excited about him, show it. Like, I got to see it. We've seen small bits and pieces here and there. Like, I think he's taken a couple end arounds last season. He seems to be catching the ball fairly well in practice. Knock on wood, I don't know that I've seen him actually drop a ball. Shep's obviously talked very highly of him and how he hasn't really had any missed assignments. That's the thing that he's tracking through the practices. I would like to see, I obviously we can't watch the practice, but I would like to hear that Kendrick Law popped and is one of those dudes that can really make this offense hum a little bit. I don't know. I feel like I've heard a lot about it, and now it's time to see it, or in this case, hear it.
Yeah, and if Ryan Williams makes a spectacular play, he's going to set the world on fire. Expectations, which are already insane, will just go through the roof.
I was going to say, if Ryan Williams or Caleb Odom, all they need is one big play, and people are just going to be like, ooh.
Yeah, if they drop that highlight and there's a one-handed catch by Ryan Williams, they're going to put him in the Heisman race around here, man.
Or they just go up in a contested catch, 6'5" Odom in the red zone, right? Like he just leaps over, I don't know that he could do that to Malachi Moore, but if he leaps over a Devonta Smith, for example, and catches a pass, one, great ball, but two, that's, he might be involved this year.
We'll see.
That's the scrimmage will be Saturday morning. We'll talk to DeBoer afterwards, probably around noon or 12:30ish. So we'll have some stories and updates from there. This was fun, though, Alex. I appreciate you jumping on, just us two. Hopefully, Rodak will be able to join us after Fan Day so we can kind of recap the scrimmage and what we maybe see from Fan Day, if we see anything at all. I'm not sure that it's supposed to be a super extensive practice, but we're going to be able to watch the whole thing, and maybe we'll learn a couple things from walkthrough. Maybe we won't. But yeah, we'll probably circle back and do that early next week. We do get to watch one more practice next week, so be sure to stay strapped in for that. So yeah, that's most of today's show. Before we come back next week, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 24/7 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7, 24/7 Sports. The season is here, guys. Like, the first scrimmage is this weekend. Week 1 is 23 days away. We don't want you to miss anything. We're going to produce a lot of fun stuff. So you definitely want to be sure that you have your subscription in order so that you can catch everything that we're doing at Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. Talk to you all again soon.